Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 147 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Cornhusker fans and college football fans. And you were talking in fast pace there. You're in a hurry today, Alex.
Well, what can I say? There's a lot going on in the world of college football.
That's right.
Yes, we got a lot to get to today. This is a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we're going to be talking about some national news, including some potential rule changes coming to college football for this year, as well as some shakeups in the Nebraska college football world and excitement about the upcoming spring practices.
Yes, absolutely. Just lots of positive things going on in Lincoln right now.
Yes, which is good to hear after the years we've had recently. So we had a couple of topics that we were going to mention on our previous podcast, but we've kind of moved them to today. And one of them that's quite interesting is the NCAA Football Rules Committee has submitted a proposal to a different NCAA committee that's going to meet on April 20th. And so they proposed a few rule changes for college football. And they kind of vary from minor to more significant. So I'm going to go over the three of them that they discussed. One would involve prohibiting consecutive timeouts, which you usually only see in scenarios like icing of a kicker. So that would kind of make that harder to do. And it says also penalties at the end of the first and third quarter would carry over and be enforced on the first play of the next quarter, versus right now where if there was a penalty but the clock is expired, they would give you one more play, right, to play out that new down. So they would just move that over into the next quarter. All these rules are basically designed for the most part to encourage the games to go faster, and I think both for TV reasons and because they're thinking that it will lead to less player injuries, right? If there's just less plays overall. So just trying to speed up the game in various ways. The bigger one, though, is in regards to first downs. So this rule would say that the game clock will continue to run when a first down is gained, except if you're within the 2-minute mark at the end of each half. I believe this is the current rule in the NFL, so they're trying to move college football closer in that regard. There was even a discussion of having the clock run after an incomplete pass. However, that rule did not make it beyond the beginning stages, I believe, of the discussion, which I'm very thankful about because that would have been a major change. But what are your thoughts on these three potential rules?
So I would agree with you that the one that they tossed out would have been a just absolutely monumental change to the sport, and not in a good way. I'm going to say two things. First, I agree with you, and in the write-ups that have been provided, through various sports organizations and stuff. Obviously, we're not able to interview the committee within the NCAA that's doing this, so you're reading their minds as far as what the purpose is of why they are wanting to make these changes. But bottom line is they want the games to be shorter. Well, I have a couple of really simple suggestions for shortening the game, and it has to do with some of the stupid back-to-back timing of timeouts, of commercials rather, and how often they do commercial sequences where a team scores a touchdown, then there's commercials, then they come back, do the extra point, then there's commercials, then they kick the ball off, and then there's commercials, right? If you want to disrupt or minimize the disruption of play and time clock movement, then don't do that, right? So in my opinion, I think they should try to hold the television partners, the media partners, to task a little bit as well with regard to this issue of the games being too long. As far as the three specific rule changes, obviously that third one was that you mentioned is the big one. I get that it will definitely reduce the number of plays. that happen in a game. It will shorten the amount of time that it takes to complete a game because of that. I am never really one who's all in favor of something that shortens the number of plays. I think the game of football has historically, if you go back to the origins of the sport, was a game that was supposed to be a game of attrition to a certain extent. Okay. And so doing things like this, although it does achieve the objective of trying to make it fit into the 3-hour television window, it actually is very, very negative for teams like Nebraska or any other team that has an environment or a circumstance that would motivate them to want to run the football, because we need as many plays as we can, so that a team that is, if you commit to being physical, then you want as many snaps as you can get so you can wear your opponent down. And this becomes more difficult when that clock is continuously running. Additionally, now to stop the clock, again, it re-emphasizes the importance of passing the football, right? And that pass incompletion that stops a clock becomes even more of a valuable asset, even though it's a negative play, right? You throw a pass, you don't complete the pass, so that's the negative result, but at least you get the benefit of the clock stopping. So from a strategic standpoint, that's a huge deal. And if now, instead of a 3rd and 1, where if you've got a good running game and you can be confident that, hey, I have a high degree of confidence that we're going to get a first down here, and then we're going to be able to stop the clock, and then we'll be able to run another play. Now you need to know that, okay, I'm going to run this football, and if I get the first down, the clock's going to continue to run. So that's a negative thing.
Right. I have a few things to say. To start with, I'll just quote this article that I read that was talking about the rule changes. Yeah. And this is from Kirby Smart, who's the co-chair of this committee and, of course, the head coach at Georgia. So the quote is, "This rule change is a small step intended to reduce the overall game time and will give us some time to review the impact of the change." So they are viewing it primarily from this perspective of shortening the game, like we mentioned before. And I'm indifferent on the first two changes, the ones about consecutive timeouts and the penalties at the end of the quarters. Those I'm fine with. They're not that big of a deal. But the first down one is definitely the meaty one that deserves some discussion. To your point, on the one hand, it definitely hurts teams if you're more running based and you're trying to chase a lead, right? If you're trying to make a comeback and time is of the essence, now running the football burns even more clock than it currently does. On the other hand, if you had a lead and you're trying to run the ball to run out the clock, that becomes even more effective, right? Because now the clock isn't stopping when you get a first down and you want the clock to keep rolling. So
that is true.
There's a balance in the strategic differences it would add to the game. And I suppose one thought process could be that in the good old days in the past, right, back when Nebraska was really dominant, almost all teams were very run focused, right? And there was much less passing. And so even though the clock was stopping when you got a first down, you were running it much more than you're passing it, and so you weren't getting those incomplete passes that would, put a total stop to the game clock. Whereas now we have a lot more passing, and so that's more common.
Right.
So that thus has, like you say, lengthened the game and made it so that passing focused teams can score in a very short amount of game clock time in a way that you just didn't see 30, 40 years ago.
Right. Well, and the other thing that about that is when with today's offenses, whether you're running it or passing it, so many of them are hurry up and they're snapping the ball way faster. Not a lot of teams huddle, all that sort of stuff. So the safety element of this, of reducing the number of plays per game. Well, you know what? The last time we did a set of rule changes that were designed to shorten the game, what did coaches do? They sped up the offense, right? So the idea of making rule changes to try to shorten the game is not a new conversation, okay? and what exactly they did to try to do that, I can't. I'd have to do some research and get back to you, right? But I know that to be true. Okay, so just accept that for right now, for the sake of this conversation. My point is that the reaction by the coaches in the sport, whether it was directly because of that or just the evolution of the sport, teams gravitated to a faster paced offense, and the number of plays per team went up, not down. Okay. Because at the end of the day, if you're an offensive coach, you want to give your offense as many opportunities to be successful and score as you can. And so that's one of the advantages of the fast-paced offense. You are absolutely right. If you're trying to protect the lead, then you want to be able to grind clock and shorten the game. And again, you're absolutely right that this change will help with that gear, so to speak. When people want to shorten the game, they're going to be able to do that even more effectively now because of that clock not stopping. That's great for somebody who's got a lead, right? But if you're a running team who's trying to play catch up, it's going to be even more difficult to remain patient with your offensive prowess, your offensive capabilities, and so people will feel compelled to abandon the running game and move towards more of an aggressive passing structure because of that rule change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking it would probably also incentivize more running plays if you are going to run it, running plays that are designed to go to the edges and go out of bounds, right? Because that's still in place. The clock will stop until the ball is placed back on the field.
Right.
So,
like a temporary stoppage. Yeah.
right. So that's one way to slow down the clock if you can't rely on getting the first down to stop the clock anymore. And obviously, it should be said that all three of these rules we're discussing have not been implemented. Like I said, on the 20th of April, they're going to a different panel that's going to decide if they are approved or not.
Right. There's another element to this that I think will come into play more than people realize. The two timeouts in a row thing. I totally get that when people are using them at the end of a half to, or just as someone is about to kick a field goal, and so to try to ice the kicker. I get that, but there are numerous situations that I can recall over the many years that I've watched the sport where a team calls a timeout because they want to make sure they get the right personnel on the field, or they want to change the play because the coach sees at the line of scrimmage that there's just a bad matchup situation, so he needs to call a timeout to get the team out of the play that it's in. Okay, and but now you call that first timeout, and then something is wrong the second time. Somebody's not lined up right. You change the play. You got the wrong personnel in there. The wrong guy came off the field, whatever. Now you don't have the choice to call a second timeout in a row because this rule exists. And it really doesn't have anything to do with icing a kicker or doing that sort of a thing. But it is really critical because that play could be very, very important to the outcome of the game.
Right.
Again, we've talked about in the past, most college football games boil down to 5 or 6 plays, right? 5 or 6 plays are the things that swung the game from one way to another. And if because of this new rule, a coach is unable to stop a negative thing from happening, or a not as positive as it should be circumstance because he can't call a second timeout in a row, to me, that's a significant change to the game. I totally am in favor of it if it was maybe more specifically targeted at timeouts used to induce delays for kicker icing a kicker, or delaying something like that, the end of a half, as opposed to a genuine, I need to call a timeout because my team is not lined up properly.
Well, and the other thing I thought about just as you were discussing that was what I've seen more commonly is near the end of a game, right? Or the end of a half, say that you're trying to score before, the clock runs out and you've got
Right.
two timeouts and
Right.
you want to use both of them in a row because you don't have much time left.
Right.
Now, I guess you couldn't do that. So you would have to, maybe you'd have to just give up a play and spike the ball, right? To
Yep.
force the clock to stop. and in lieu of using a timeout.
Right. And so now that quarterback and the whole team, in fact, the whole offensive team needs to have their head on straight, right? That's a whole new level of specialized, special circumstance coaching that you're going to have to do to say, okay, now the situation is we've got 2 timeouts left. We've only got 25 seconds left on the play clock. We're calling this play with the intention that this play is going to get us a first down, which would stop the clock in the last 2 minutes of the half, right? Or the last 2 minutes of the game. But if the play is a negative play, we can't call a second timeout. So that will motivate me not to do a running play, because now if I do a running play and I don't get the first down, then I can't call a second timeout. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there's just all kinds of very specific circumstances where doing the consecutive timeout things was truly part of the game and the strategy of the game. Now, you could also argue that calling 2 timeouts in a row to ice a kicker is a strategy decision too, but it's a pain in the ass one that's kind of goofy, right? It's disjointed and it causes these extended delays where people are just waiting around. There's not really anything going on. All we did was call the timeout to make this kicker think about it for a little while longer, right? And that's the kind of thing that extends the game, and they're thinking we should be able to get rid of that. Well, in doing that, they're also going to affect all these other sets of circumstance.
Right. Yep. Which, now, so having discussed this with you, I think my position is I'm fine with the one about if there's a penalty at the end of a quarter, it moves over to the next quarter. Like, that's fine, whatever. And then with the double timeouts one, if maybe, like you said, maybe if it was specified in terms of kicking situations, you're not allowed to do consecutive timeouts. That would get rid of the majority of the times where we feel like it's being used flagrantly, let's say, and keep the strategy in place. And then just the total X on the whole, keeping the clock running after a first down, because we've discussed how that emphasizes things even more in terms of the passing game, which the sport has already moved in that direction over the past 20 years.
Right.
So
well, but I'm here to tell you you're right. So I fall in line with you completely in that I'm okay with the end of quarter penalty thing. That is actually a good idea for speeding up the game. And but the stopping the clock or not stopping the clock rather on a first down, I dislike, even though that is the NFL rule and it's more like NFL. Well, college football needs to stop worrying about trying to be the NFL. You're not the NFL. It's a different game. There's a different set of circumstances. These players don't practice like NFL teams practice. Okay. They're also students who are going to class all week long. They got a lot more stuff going on in their head. So being able to have the sophistication that is necessary to maximize their performance is even harder in terms of the coaching aspect, I think, in college than it is in the pros. In the pros, that's your job. That's all you got, right? That's what you do. In college, there's a lot more going on, right? Especially today. So, especially with NIL and everything, now these kids need to be focused on building their social media brand and all the shit that they've got going on, right? So I just think that that's not going to be positive for my enjoyment of the sport, because it means less plays and it means less emphasis on the running game and more emphasis on the passing game, and it's going to negatively affect comebacks. The last minute comebacks where a team that is the underdog comes back and wins because the favorite kind of seizes up and gets tight in a tight game late in the game. It's going to be harder for that team to pull off the comeback, right? That lesser opponent, because they're going to have less time to do it.
Right. Well, on the one hand, they'll still, during the 2 minutes, right, which is when most of these like last minute comebacks happen, they would still get the timeout, the time stoppage from a first down. But on the opposing side, like we said, the team that's in the lead will be able to kill more clock before that 2 minute point.
Exactly.
So, thinking about how many games came down, right, like the last 10 seconds of a game, well,
Right.
what if you never had those 10 seconds because the other team
Yeah.
killed that time?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to have a more dramatic effect than people realize, in my opinion, not in a good way. However, I will say that because of the power of media and the complaint, the negative, if you will, of games going, 3.5 hours plus, right? 3 hours and 40 minutes is viewed as a negative enough thing for the sport in terms of being able to slot it into time slots and all that throughout the course of the day with all this broadcasting that we do, that the all three of these will pass. I will be shocked if these don't all pass.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I guess just for within the NCAA, they probably like the idea of, well, our internal team did all this discussion and came up with these ideas. So they've already done a lot of thought and work into this. So let's go ahead and improve it.
Well, here's my hope that what Smart said, right? What he said as one of the committee members is accurate, that they're going to give it a go. That means they're going to reevaluate it after a year or two and consider moving back in the other direction if they determine that it has affected the game in ways they didn't anticipate it. The unintended consequences kind of aspect of this, right? And if some of the negative aspects that I'm talking about and that you've shared actually start to be exhibited, and there's a realization that this has negatively affected the entertainment value of the game and all that sort of stuff, even though it has shortened the clock, okay, is that a net positive for the sport?
Right.
So, but I think that's a battle that has long been lost, and I'm just going to have to accept that these things are going to happen.
Right. There we go. So now that we're about 20 minutes in the podcast, how would you like to open your beverage there?
Oh, what? So yes, okay, let's do that.
Yep. I've got one of my sparkling ices again here.
I'm okay. So this is the other advantage of what I'm doing, Alex. Instead of having a beer today, I am coming to you, and I'm having a nice little on the rocks glass of Traverse City Whiskey Company's barreled straight bourbon whiskey. This is a local favorite of mine, and you've been there a few times when been back in Traverse City. A great local distillery who's won some national awards for having the best small batch bourbon in the country. So it's absolutely fabulous. It's got a great flavor, and I really, really enjoy this bourbon. It makes great what we call Michigan mules, which is a mule drink that uses this bourbon instead of vodka, and that's what I'm enjoying right now. So cheers to that. Here we go.
All right. And they should hire you as their spokesman. The way you went on like
Yes.
that. All right. Now, one topic we discussed on the previous podcast was rumors about additions to the Pac-12, which included South Dakota State and I think it was Methodist, one of the Methodist schools.
San Diego State,
Okay.
not South Dakota State. Nope. Yeah, you got that one wrong.
Okay.
That's
Sorry.
San Diego State, which is right there in California, obviously,
Yes, that
and
makes
is a
more
very good
sense.
football school. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So San Diego State, and then was it SMU, Southern Methodist
Yes.
University? Yeah,
Yep.
and another Texas school. I felt like there was another Texas school that was discussed.
Well, that's the two we talked about last time.
Okay.
Now, there have been no official confirmations about either additions or subtractions from the Pac 12 since we last talked. However, there have been plenty of rumors and rumblings about schools being interested in leaving the Pac 12 because they're still in their ongoing media negotiations, and some of the bigger schools are trying to kind of get their share of the pie rather than splitting things up equally, like saying, well, we're bringing in the eyeballs, so we should get more of the money, etc. Along with the Pac-12 just being in the weakest kind of spot of the Power Five conferences right now in terms of financials and overall viewership and all that stuff. So once again, nothing is official, but it's sounding like we're gearing up for some shakeups there.
Right. Well, I know they're negotiating heavily with not only the traditional media members, the Foxes, ESPNs of the world, but they're also doing all the streaming services, including Apple and Amazon and people like that, right?
Right.
So they're trying to, be the leader of that transition, maybe, or movement into the streaming side of the world. But the reality is that I don't know that those organizations are in a position to provide the kind of money that would put that USC and UCLA reduced Pac-12 group into the stratosphere of a competitive per school payout, right? Compared to even the Big 12. I mean, that's really this becomes a battle for survival between the Big 12, the Pac 12, and the ACC, the other three of the Power Five, other than the Big 10 and the SEC. Those three conferences are the ones that really have to fight. All right. Now, the ACC's is made a little bit more complicated because of the length of their contract and their commitments to rights that go out to like 2036. I mean, they made a huge mistake and now are being held to the fire on it. And that's a whole nother conversation. But let's focus on the two that seem to be the most active right now, which is the Pac-12 and the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is actively having conversations with some Pac-12 schools about joining the Big 12, and the Big 12 becoming a super conference of at least 16, if not going all the way to 20. I think there is some conversation among the Big 12 because, again, one of the advantages they have of having no longer having a one or two big boys, right? Because Texas and OU left, they are now a consortium of schools that would all be viewed as relatively equal on the media rights and fan base structure. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there's not any one big boy that kind of can come in and dictate the terms. And so the idea of the Big 12 being able to expand to say 20 schools or even 24, all right, and basically just go out and consume most of the Pac-12 schools, all right, as well as combine with the schools they're already adding to get back to 12 schools, the BYU's and the Central Floridas, right, that they're bringing in, and all of a sudden you have a coast to coast conference, much like the Big Ten has become, where you've got schools on the East Coast with West Virginia and or not East Coast, but I mean easterly area, West Virginia. You've got and you've got UCF now in Florida, right? That are part of the Big 12, and then you go all the way out to maybe one of the Arizona schools and Colorado. I know ASU, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah were the four that were talked about the most frequently, and that would get them to from 12 to 16. But then you could see them going ahead and saying, hey, you know what? If we're going to do that, we'll go ahead and extend an offer to Stanford and Cal and Oregon State. I don't know. They could come up with some other numbers that get them bigger. You understand the logic?
Yeah. Yeah. Though I have always kind of thought in these talks about conference realignment that once one of the conferences kind of fires the pistol, if you will, the kind of the triggers, the run to get to a super conference, basically to become like a 20 team conference or whatever, then that's kind of because to get that and to have teams of relevance, right? Like they basically have to chomp up, what's left of the Pac-12, and then all the remaining schools would kind of panic, right, and try to go elsewhere, and then
Right.
it's kind of like everything's on the table at that point in terms of both the SEC and the Big Ten and the ACC maybe all trying to, increase the size of their rosters too, to
Yes.
see where things land.
Exactly. It's a musical chairs thing. Like, I don't know how much conversation, for example, the Big 12 is engaged in with, say, Washington and Oregon or even Stanford, for example, right? Which are, I think, the three or bigger boys left in the Pac-12 inventory, and the ones that would be most appealing to the Big Ten. Maybe Arizona's in that mix, also because they're an AAU school academically. And so you could see the Big Ten having conversations like that. But the problem is the Big Ten's looking at that landscape and saying none of those is going to bring enough money in and of themselves individually to grow our per school compensation in a TV market, right? Based on TV markets, which is why they haven't already invited them to join. I mean, if they felt that Washington and Oregon would add more money than they're already paying out per school, they would have already been invited, right? I mean, that's the reality. Now, if you combine Washington and Oregon and say Stanford with Notre Dame and Clemson and Florida State from the ACC, and you truly make yourself a national conference from coast to coast, now all of a sudden you've got a 20-team conference in the Big Ten. That would be phenomenal, right? Now they would only move in that direction if something caused them to do it, because they need to have Notre Dame or Clemson or somebody else that comes into that mix rather than just Washington and Oregon, because those two aren't enough.
Right.
Does that make sense? So there's all these different moving things, and obviously that we're not doing that in a vacuum. Before we would ever get the opportunity to do that, darn good and well that the SEC would be having conversations with Clemson and Florida State and others as well. So a bidding war of sorts could break out. But the tumbler that might make that happen is basically Big 12 ravaging the Pac-12 by taking 4 schools from the Pac-12 and just devastating the Pac-12. So now their media rights negotiation is screwed. And now if you're Oregon State or Washington State, you're really freaking out, right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to the Big 12 and saying, hey, don't stop at 16, embrace 20. And they'd be making a pitch to say, take us, bring us along, and let's make this thing 20. And then if they do that, then Oregon and Washington are looking for a lifeline from the Big Ten, and maybe they do that. But I think if the Big Ten was going to take that swipe, they would have already done it. I think they're waiting for something to happen on the ACC side, and I know there's a lot of work going on in the courts system right now to figure out, is there a legal way for us to get out of this horrible contract that we have as an ACC, that where we committed our media rights till 2036. That was just so stupid.
Right.
And so somebody's got to figure out a legal path out of that. And the reality is, since it's with ESPN, the only true legal path out of that is if the television partner was willing to agree, right? And then the other member schools would have to concede in some way, and they'd have to get paid off. Well, ESPN would be more motivated to do that if they were joining the SEC, which ESPN is associated with. They're far less likely to do that if it's the Big Ten having the conversation, because that's Fox, right? So, I mean, it gets really complicated. I know I just threw a lot out there. Yeah. I'm going to shut up now and let you comment.
No, yeah. Well, just as you were talking there, I immediately thought, well, yeah, if the ACC took a dive, but it was to the benefit of the SEC, then ESPN might be open to that. Because I don't know about Clemson, but I definitely feel like Florida State would be more inclined to be in the SEC than the Big Ten, just because of geography and culture and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you're probably right. But Miami would probably rather be in the Big Ten, because Miami academically is a very high-end school.
Right.
And so is Clemson. Clemson views itself as a higher-end academic institution. I don't know if they're a member of the AAU or not, but so you could probably see the president side of those institutions saying, hey, we would rather be associated with the Big Ten if we could.
Right, definitely. So we're going to move on from that. We'll obviously keep an eye on the whole conference realignment situation, maybe do an emergency pod if need be, if the whole Pac-12 gets blown up here.
I'm going to predict that something is going to happen with the Colorado, Arizona State, Utah thing and the Big 12. I mean, it's going to come to a head. There's going to be a bunch of dialogue, and it's either they're going to pull the trigger and do it, or they're not. And if they don't, that means that the Pac-12 staved off elimination and got a negotiation with somebody that was good enough to please everyone. Otherwise, it's going to happen. Big 12 is going to end up with them, and they're going to end up at least 16.
Right. Seems that way. Now, this is an interesting story. It's a bit older now, during the recruiting period from this past winter, but there was a lot of talk about this highly regarded four-star quarterback named Jaden Rashada, who initially committed to Florida. And the rumor going around, and then there were rumors, and then there was a big report filed by these journalists and stuff who looked into all this stuff, essentially saying that Florida was offering him a $13.85 million NIL deal to commit to Florida. And this one particular article had some of the commitments that he would have to do and how the payment structure works, because it's like it starts off smaller, then it would increase from year to year, over his 4-year career. And he would have to do, a certain amount of social media posts a month and, go on a radio show and things like that. But it was the requirements to meet the NIL, name, image, and likeness standard were very low. So it was one of those kind of hyperbolic examples of how crazy the whole NIL thing was getting.
Right.
But apparently this one was even too crazy for the crazy guys down there in Florida. Because that negotiation for that deal fell through, even though he committed to Florida. So then he left Florida and is now going to Arizona State, which is the school that his dad played for. So that's more of a legacy, commit to him. And the news I saw was that, he was certainly not getting paid anywhere near that amount of money to go to Arizona State. But what was your initial reaction when you read about that news?
Well, my initial reaction obviously was that was crazy to hear those numbers. And I want to clarify one thing. This particular athlete started their career, their commitment process at the University of Miami. And there was an apparent, or it was rumored that he was receiving about $8 or $9 million in NIL money from the University of Miami. And then kind of overnight, he switched his commitment from there to Florida, and the number grew to the $13 million number, right? So it's just an example of how, because there are no rails on this whole NIL thing, and anybody who doesn't think that there's basically pay for play going on is, got their head in the sand. So the reality is, I don't think the experts who follow recruiting closely believe that either the $9 million or the $13 million were real, right? And I have read one from a national sports writer and recruiting expert, Mike Farrell, who's a long time with Rivals and that sort of stuff, is now on his own. He wrote, a piece about it, and he knows a lot of the players involved specifically in NIL at Florida, and he basically said in his article that he had talked with them, and they said under no circumstances was there ever a mutually agreed upon $13.85 million commitment. That never existed in terms of it being truly mutually agreed to. Now, some people might have thrown out that number. There might have been conversations about putting together a package or whatever, but it was never formalized or anything like that. And but it just calls to question then this whole process, right? That's the bigger issue. I mean, it's sad for this kid because he's now got a black mark against him. He is damaged goods in the eyes of, frankly, a lot of NFL franchises are going to be very hesitant if he ends up having enough of a successful collegiate career to even be an NFL prospect. There are going to be some he's going to pay for it, so to speak, in terms of how NFL teams view him, and he's going to have to demonstrate that was a moment of immaturity and all that, and convince people otherwise. because obviously you don't want to hire an employee that's going to be going that route, right? Going to head down the social media, make this public. Let's argue this disagreement out in public instead of keeping it private.
Okay, so I was under the impression that, like, it had leaked out through, journalists and rumors and things like that, but you're saying that the kid himself made some of this public.
I think the rumors. Well, here's the thing: there's no way that Florida ever released any of that information because it was never formally committed to by them, right? So the University of Florida never leaked it, and certainly it might have been leaked by Miami to say, well, since the rumor was that Miami was offering him 9 million, the only reason he would leave the University of Miami as a commitment and go to the University of Florida, it must have been that they offered him a better deal. So maybe the rumor originated from somebody speculating about why he decommitted from Miami and went to Florida. But this is the problem with this unbridled process, right? No one is held accountable for the truth. And it's equally likely that maybe his father and or other handlers around him were the ones who threw that out there just in the hopes of catching the big fish, right? Getting the life-changing money arrangement. But as you say, after the dust settles, he ends up committing to and signing a letter of intent to go play at Arizona State, where everyone acknowledges and knows that he is not getting anything near that in NIL. In fact, I would be shocked if he's getting an NIL package that even approaches $2 million over the course of his career at this point.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So yeah, this, we have a longer trademarked dad rant about NIL and transfer portal and all that scheduled for later in the summer, I'm sure. But this is just a one of the prime examples of how crazy the NIL thing is and how destructive it can be for the player involved, right? Because he went from potentially being a star quarterback at Miami or Florida. Now he's at Arizona State, which is like a solid school, but definitely a step down in terms of competitiveness and prestige compared to where he was.
Exactly. I just think that I'm hoping that examples like that one, and there's going to be countless others under of a variety of other different circumstances that hopefully motivate the powers that be. And when I say the powers that be, I think it's going to have to be the presidents of the universities with the recommendation and maybe even advice direction of a group of athletic directors from the Power Five conference schools that are going to say, hey, guys, we've got to get this under control. This has to somehow come back under the umbrella of the institutions so we can control this a little bit. And we need to be honest about the fact that this isn't about just NIL. This is now a true pay to play situation, and we've got to come to terms with that. However we do it, right? We got to set up a series of rules or whatever that really define it. And if they hold it out to not be pay for play, and there really has to be basically name, image, and likeness work done to earn that money, well, then that's going to dramatically change all of those things, right? Because if now all of a sudden these kids truly have to earn that money, they have to do appearances and they have to do all this social media stuff and things like that, and it's substantial because of the the sponsors involved. Well, how much time do these kids have?
Right.
They're already going to school, playing a sport that requires 40 hours a week of their time commitment when you include not just the 25 hours of contact time that is allowed, but the extra stuff that all of them do in terms of weight training and study halls and all that stuff, right? I mean, when you add that all up, it's 40 hours a week. They got a full-time job and they're going to school.
Right. And now, yeah, you're adding on NIL responsibilities on top of that.
Yeah. Now the reality is a lot of NIL is there isn't much to it.
Right.
Because
currently.
It's not really about name, image, and likeness. It's about we're paying you this amount of money to play for us.
Right.
It's pay for play.
Right. And there are exceptions to that, right? That, like, we've seen that, like, you see these players in like real commercials or like billboards for companies and things like that. But we know that a lot of the other thing is going on.
Right. Exactly. And those types of things, the real ones, the real commercial stuff, I mean, those compensations are more in line with traditional sponsor relationships, and they're not that much money, right? Like at the University of Nebraska, one of the volleyball players has gotten associated with the airport, the Lincoln Airport, and so there's a big stand up of her in the airport, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she's marketing herself to have people use the Lincoln Airport. That's great. She did a commercial with her walking down a runway and all this sort of stuff, right? So now, how much she got paid for that? Not that much, right? Not certainly not hundreds of thousands of dollars, not
Right.
even close to millions of dollars. So that's name, image, and likeness, how the NCAA intended for it to be. People promoting a specially named coffee drink at the favorite coffee shop. Those are the kind of things, right?
Right.
It's going to get even more complicated because there's already a push among women athletes to be very aggressive about trying to seek equity in compensation for name, image, and likeness between females and males.
Right. Like Title IX stuff.
Yeah, that's which you know what? It's the free market. Okay, you get what you get, right? You get what what somebody believes you're worth in terms of marketing dollars to them,
Right.
right? But when you have these collectives, that's where you're just basically getting people to contribute money to have a stash of cash that you can then hand out to people. These are individuals. These are people like me who are fans of the sport saying, hey, I'm going to give $100 a month to the University of Nebraska's collective so that they have money to give to players. Well, that sponsorship, they're not going to be talking about my business, right?
They're not.
There's
Yeah.
no name, image, and likeness there for me.
No.
So
No one's holding a red wrench for you. You mean?
exactly.
All right. Um, Now we're going to transition into the Nebraska side of this discussion. There's a few different things going on. And one cool thing that kind of got dropped on us as a bit of a surprise yesterday was there was a good 50-minute interview discussion moderated by the athletic director at Nebraska, Trev Albers, between our current coach, Matt Rule, and then the legendary Tom Osborne. Kind of going back and forth, talking to both of them about their different kind of coaching philosophies and back then versus now and things like that. And I thought it was a great discussion. Both Matt and Tom were very well spoken and very, generally complimentary to each other. One interesting thing I noticed was that Matt talked about how he has been studying, old Nebraska film from like the glory days in the 90s and things like that, and talking about how, people say, well, you just ran it down their throats, but there was a lot more to that in terms of like the motions that you were doing and who was blocking who and things like that. A lot of great complications and innovations that Tom came up with, not only on the field, but with things like the weight training program and the diet programs and all that sort of stuff. And then the conversation kind of came to, well, how do you balance the old with the new in terms of keeping what Nebraska is traditionally good at, but then also doing the new things of this era because the rules have changed. You can't run those exact plays that Tom used to, and other teams have caught up to us in terms of weight training and diet and having great facilities and all that sort of stuff. And Matt didn't necessarily go into detail about what those innovations were, but, basically said that, yeah, he's working on his own brand to make Nebraska stand out.
Right. My take was similar. I love the discussion. The first thing that struck me was, obviously for those who may not know athletic director Trev Albers' history, Trev started his career primarily as a sports broadcaster and sports commentator, first with CNNSI, which was a previous entity of those two organizations merged for sports, and then ultimately at ESPN, where he was a commentator during the studio shows for many, well, not many, but for a few years in that role. So he was very media savvy. He was always a well-spoken athlete, even when he was a collegiate student at Nebraska. But you can just tell he's interviewed a lot of people, and he did a great job of asking really broad questions, but leading the discussion and allowing there to be some commentary back and forth, and yet giving the platform to each of those coaches, both Coach Tom Osborne and Coach Rule, to let them answer some of these questions. And I just thought the whole thing was just really well done. You could tell that all three of them were fairly comfortable. I mean, Tom never comes across as completely comfortable in front of a TV, but Trev Albers clearly is, and so is Matt Rule. And so that's the exciting thing for me to see is I think we have a coach who's very, very comfortable in his own skin, and he has a vision for what he wants to accomplish. And I don't think there's any doubt about that, right? And he has the ability to articulate what that vision is. So that excites me that we have a coach that really knows how to do that, because it's been a long time since I mean, frankly, Tom knew exactly what he was doing, but he was a very quiet, understated guy, and he kept a lot of things close to his vest. And it was in the day and age before social media, so life was very different. But after Tom, there's not another coach we've had that even approaches what Matt Rule is in terms of the ability to interact with media.
Right.
Matt is on a level that's different than any of the other coaches we've had since Tom. So, I mean, you went to Ohio University. You know how uncomfortable Frank Solich was around a
camera.
A camera. So that is really cool. And then what you also said, that I think it's great that Matt was able to take this opportunity, because you've got a bunch of expectations out there, because they've talked about wanting to integrate the fullback into their offense, and they're wanting to run the football at Nebraska. But I think he just threw a little anchor out there to Nebraska fans to say, well, hold your horses, guys. You're not going to be seeing the Nebraska of old anytime soon, because the reality is that's no longer legal. The chop blocks and the cut blocks on the edge that our fullbacks used to do regularly, and that our linemen used to do when pulling regularly, are now considered illegal, because so many blocks below the waist have become officially illegal in the sport, but weren't back then, right? So
Right.
a lot of those plays just wouldn't be as effective as they were. But some of the fundamentals, he spent some time talking about the importance of blocking downfield. Both Tom and Matt Rule spoke extensively on this subject, and that's, to me, is huge, because Tom Osborne was adamant about this as when he was a coach, and I can tell you this goes back to the 1970s when he started as a coach. And that is that, you know what, you can have great blocking at the line of scrimmage, but if you don't have wide receivers blocking, then that running play, it's going to go somewhere between 3 yards and 12. Okay. You have good blocking from your wide receivers, where on every single play you're grading them, and the expectation in every snap of practice is that you're blocking guys. And if you can knock them on their ass and decleat them, that's a good thing. And we're going to measure you on that. Okay. And what does that do? That makes that 12-yard run a 45-yard touchdown run.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it play out time and time again for years and years and years. And our wide receivers were absolutely impeccable. One of the reasons why we had a surprising number of wide receivers who got into the NFL, and many of them were reasonably successful. Were they the superstars that got 1,000 yards receiving? No. A few of them were, but most were not. But a bunch of them stayed on rosters because they were so good at blocking downfield.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And even in the NFL, that was valued enough to keep a guy around and be a first down wide receiver, even though he might only be throwing the ball, 12, 15 times a year. Okay. But because he was a good blocker, he would get 20 snaps a game.
Right.
Right. So that's where the value comes in, because that's something that I think Matt Rule has picked up in his film study is, hey, I see what these wide receivers did back then.
Yeah.
So I think these wide receivers are going to be in for a very interesting spring, because they really loaded up on wide receivers in the recruiting process. And so we're going to have a thinning of the herd in the wide receiver room in a big way before next fall. And I think a big part of that is going to be evaluating how much they're willing to commit to the complete role of being a wide receiver at the University of Nebraska, which is going to include some very physical blocking.
Right.
And it'll be interesting to see.
One thing I thought was interesting was that Tom made it a point to say, like, I'm not here to be a cheerleader for Matt, but I have liked what I've seen, and he specifically mentions, like, the Big Ten is a physical conference, right? And so you need to kind of adapt your game plan to that reality of dealing with those big boys up on the front lines and everything, which is quite the contrast to how Scott Frost came in at the beginning of his term, where he was kind of like, well, I'm going to bring in my offense and I'm going to make the Big Ten change to me. And that didn't end up happening, and he realized he had to go the other way. So I'm sure Matt Rule has gotten the message there.
Right.
There was also some good discussions also just then about like player management, Tom spent a good bit of time talking about this unity council, that was like 2 players from each position, that would come together and with a weekly meeting and like, just helping to iron out certain annoyances, just try to make things better overall as a conduit from like the players to communicate to the coaches. And Matt Rule talked about how, he has a lot of former players on his current staff, his coaching staff, and he said how he sees that as a great kind of sign of his success, and that he's got these guys who played for him, enjoyed playing for him, and now they're here working for him because they like being around him, clearly, and think that he has the right football mind to be successful. So I thought those were all interesting points.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think the reason, Tom has explained that the Unity Council, and that was a big factor. But the real fundamental message of that is that, at some point, as you build culture, because they talked about defining what is culture, defining what is toughness. He hit on some really key questions. But in trying to build a culture, it was central to Tom's greatest success, his best years, if you will, where after he had been able to establish a culture where the players self-regulated their team, right? Did Tom have to get involved? Absolutely. He still had to get involved in all the issues of, having 140, 150, 18 to 23-year-olds under your responsibility. Things are going to not always go great, right? Kids are going to make mistakes. But the real reality is that a large percentage of those issues were dealt with. And then the Unity Council kept track of that stuff. And when players, had accumulated enough negative points against them, so to speak, then they would be brought to the Unity Council's attention. And those guys would make the decision about whether or not this kid was going to be given more opportunities to write his direction, or that, hey, this is the second time you've been in front of us with this many points within a 12-month period. You're done. And then they would go to the coaches and say, we think this guy needs to be let go, So it wasn't always Tom having to make that decision. The team leadership was making it for him.
Right. Well, it sounded to me from what he was saying that, like, if you had 3 violations, say you went to the Unity Council and they were hard on you, and then if you like hit 4, then you might come to Tom, and he might have to. And if you went to 5, then that meant you were probably going to have less playing time, or you might even be kicked off the team if it was serious enough, and he talked about like, well, one guy maybe had a violation and got, kicked off the team. And then another guy has another violation like that a month later. And he's like, well, but and there's a difference in punishment, people be like, well, why isn't this guy getting kicked off or whatever? When it's like, well, the first guy had a number of warnings, right? This wasn't his first serious offense or whatever, and he still went and did it, versus this other guy, So I thought it was just an interesting insight into his mind in terms of that team management side of things.
Exactly. And I think that's huge because, if a coach gets into that game of having to be the policeman, it can get really complicated. And you can end up with, what do you want to say, factions within your team, right? People who are 100% behind the coach, others who think the coach isn't being fair, all that stuff, which will always exist in any of those circumstances. But it's much more defined and and the commitment to those subgroups is much more deep if they don't have this unity council of representation within the team that is involved in that decision process, right? Ultimately, it's still Tom's decision, but he's now getting a lot of support and effort within the team to do it themselves. And he has sometimes talked about this story, and I'm going to throw it out there, and I might butcher it a little bit, but because I think it was not Jason, but Christian Peter, Jason's older brother. This was in the early '90s, and something wasn't right. Okay, and as some younger player was leaving the field, and he's literally 60 yards away from where Christian was, but Christian observed something that kid did wrong, or overheard commentary from across the field that was inappropriate, and it was like the last straw. And Christian turned around, at 295 pounds, and sprinted across that field and tackled that dude, and basically told him in no uncertain terms that ain't ever happening again. Okay, and he did that in front of the whole team, right? And that was Christian being a captain, being a leader, and recognizing I need to nip this in the bud right now. Okay, and Tom was aware that this issue, but he didn't have to deal with it because Christian did. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to get to.
Right. Yep. So yeah, it was a great conversation. I would love to see, they can't roll out Tom super often in, I know, but I'd love to see more conversations with Matt Rule, because like you say, he is very well spoken, and he's done well in those sorts of situations.
He really has.
Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is some exciting news. Obviously, next week, from when we're recording this, is the start of spring practice for Nebraska. And this weekend is actually a very important visitation weekend for Nebraska, because we have the number one quarterback in the next year's class, Dylan Raiola, visiting along with 3 other top 60 players for a total of 17 4- to 5-star players. 28 total recruits coming to visit. So a very, interesting set of talent that's here. Obviously, we have Dylan Raiola's father as one of our assistant coaches. So a lot of people, of course, are hoping that we might be able to snag him that way. A lot of these guys aren't necessarily considering Nebraska as their first, second, or even third choice. But just to have this kind of pedigree at Nebraska, which doesn't usually get a lot of 4- and 5-star type players, is pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing, is that I don't know that we could go back in the last 20, 25 years of recruiting publicity and find a single weekend where there was this many highly regarded players all coming to visit Nebraska at the same time. And the cool thing is that now the downside, of course, is it's late March. God knows what the weather's going to be like. It's not like it's guaranteed that it's going to be beautiful and sunny. But on the positive side, this is a new coaching staff that's obviously filled with dynamic, energetic young coaches. They've got a brand new facility that they're going to be walking all these guys through, that's still being built. And all these guys are going to be looking at it and saying, this is going to be opening in like July or August. A lot of the football aspects of it will be done before this football season begins. So before any of those kids got to campus, that thing's all going to be complete and outfitted with all the latest and greatest of everything. So if you're a recruit, you're looking at a facility that's going to be one of the tops in the nation over the 5 years that you're there, right? And just to correct one thing, it's not Dylan's father that's on the coaching staff; it's his uncle.
Okay.
His father is a legacy All-American and Remington award-winning, or I don't know if it was Remington, maybe it was Outland award winner father who played at Nebraska and has been a huge supporter of Nebraska athletics, over the years. So there's a strong family tie to the university with the Raiola family, but our lack of recent success certainly puts us in the back seat of Dylan's options, right? Every team that you can name, Alabama, Georgia, USC, you name the great team, Michigan, Ohio State, they all want him, right? Every single one of them. It would be great if we get him. Right now, most experts do not project us getting him. And a lot of these players, if you look down the list of all of these 4 stars, most of them do not have Nebraska as their number one choice currently. However, you never know what's going to happen when you get a synergy of all that kind of talent getting together and visiting with the players, the current players, as well as all the other fellow recruits that are going to be there. And there could be a synergy that occurs, especially around Dylan. If Dylan ultimately ended up deciding and the upset happens and he picks Nebraska, he could easily be the Pied Piper that brings another half a dozen recruits with him that say, hey, if Dylan sees the bright future at Nebraska, I really enjoyed my visit there. I'm going to join him, and we're going to be part of the group that turns around Nebraska. And that's going to be a central message that Matt Rule gives to this entire group, right, as they come through this weekend. They're going to put on a show. And, Nebraska still has phenomenal facilities for not just the weightlifting aspect of it, but also for the technical aspects of it. We have a laboratory there that is actually sponsored not just by the University of Nebraska, but by the entire Big Ten, that is located in Lincoln for athletic performance. And so we have, they talk about GPS. We have more technology on our athletes than almost anybody, where we're evaluating their heart rate and the speed that they're moving and how many reps they're getting. And I mean, it's so scientific, it's not even funny. We have obviously a great nutrition history. We're the ones who founded sports nutrition. We're the ones who founded strength and conditioning. And now we've got a brand new facility that's going to bring the latest and greatest of those technologies to the forefront for our athletes. So, I mean, as an athlete looking forward, they're going to say, okay, there's no doubt when they get done with that visit this weekend, they will have seen that this school is committed to excellence in every aspect, except for one thing. Our recent history does not reflect it.
Right.
And if they can see beyond that, a lot of these kids could very well say, this is a place I could call home.
Yeah. Well, that's the tough part with that whole, you guys will be the group that helps me turn around Nebraska, because that's been the recruiting pitch since Bo Pelini, right?
Right.
And it hasn't quite happened in any of those years.
Well, we've never had a coach like Rule.
That's true. Right. And we were just speaking about his, eloquence and,
right.
And all the young coaches he has on his staff, right, which is generally a benefit for recruiting and stuff.
The other thing is that something that Nebraska continues to be the leader in the country in, and that is the life skills area. We've always been involved in the life skills, and now I think our NIL has positioned itself not as the best NIL or the most financially supported NIL, but as an NIL that's somewhat mature in terms of its organization and its messaging and how they go about presenting the opportunities. And they can demonstrate it not just for football, but way beyond football. That's the other thing about Nebraska that's special is it doesn't matter what the sport. If it's wrestling, okay, I'm telling you, Nebraska's going to get attendance at a wrestling meet that's way above average. If it's women's basketball, they're going to fill the Pinnacle Bank Arena for a women's basketball game, right? They support athletics, track and field, you name it. The attendance, the commitment, the interest is there. And these kids are going to be able to see that and understand that before they leave.
Yeah. Well, 2 quick things on that point. One, we have so much commitment that we're going to have a volleyball game inside a football stadium coming up here later this year. So yes. that goes to show you.
And your mom and dad have already committed that on the day those tickets come on sale, we're buying them and we're going to go.
Yep.
So we're going to be part of that crowd.
And number 2, that gave me a little flashback to the conversation with Matt Rule and Tom Osborne, right? Because Tom brought up how, it's a 2-sided coin, right? There's a lot of attention, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of, speculation and all sorts of stuff going on when you're the head coach of the football program at Nebraska. but you also get the sold out crowds and the loving fan support and the financial support from, the community and all that sort of stuff. And Matt said, like, yes, it's at a level that I've never seen before. And he was at the Carolina Panthers, an NFL team, right? So the
Right.
media scrutiny at Nebraska is even crazier than that.
Oh yeah. Well, and he's used some other examples. I mean, he went to or no, actually, it was his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator went to do a presentation out in central Nebraska for, like a Kiwanis club or whatever a night. And he says, I thought there might be 40, 50 men at this meeting. And I walk in the door and there's 500 people in red. he's like, I'm in a different world than I've ever been in before.
Right. Yep. So, that's Nebraska for you. So hopefully, fingers crossed that visit goes well next week and that, spring practice gets off to a good start. We'll definitely be coming back for a podcast later in April to talk about spring practices and the spring game, of course, which will be very much hyped up, I'm sure, with a lot of people excited to see what Matt Rhule's been cooking behind the scenes. So it'll be exciting.
Well, a couple of things about spring practice. So both the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and Matt have all basically said they've been spending this last 5 weeks or whatever that they've had together. They've been having to figure out who they're going to be, right? What is their offense going to look like, really? Like they needed to have their staff come together and blend all of their experiences and with an overarching philosophy of what Satterfield wants on offense and what Tony White wants on defense, and then what Matt obviously wants the overall team to look like. So they've been intensely in these meetings, arguing for this and that and the other thing, right? And so they're settling in on that as they go into this first spring for themselves, and with a mind towards being flexible. But the point or the message he made was, I do not want to come out of spring practice saying, oh, I wish we would have introduced the team to X, Y, and Z. They want to throw it at them. So these kids, their heads are going to be spinning during this spring practice. So it's going to be very interesting to see if we are just an absolute mess come the spring game, because they are going to have been so aggressive at introducing so much offense and so much defense to these kids that they're just not going to be comfortable with it yet. You know what I mean? Like there just needs to be more reps before it all comes together. Right. So I suspect they're just going to be throwing everything they can at the wall early in spring. And then as they start to get closer to the spring game, they're going to tighten it up and hone it into a simpler game plan and a simpler approach for the last week or so, and then try to get enough execution efficiency that they can demonstrate, a little progress to the fans on that spring game. And Dylan Raiola has already indicated he's going to be back for the spring game. So he's already visited Nebraska like 3 times, and he's going to be visiting Nebraska next weekend, and then again within a month later or so at the spring game.
Right. I mean, yeah, for, the other kids are, a different discussion, but for him specifically, obviously there's a clear family and legacy tradition there. His uncle's currently coaching there, so I think we're definitely in the top 5 conversation of schools for him. Yeah. Just the question.
We're in the top 3.
Right.
We're in the top 3. It's just that the other 2 that we're in with is USC, who, if you're a quarterback, why wouldn't you want to go be coached at USC by the guy, Lincoln Riley, who's coached, 3 out of the last 4 Heisman Trophy winners? Or why wouldn't you want to go to the place that's won back-to-back national championships?
Right, with Georgia.
So the on-the-field success of the other 2 coaches is the huge, elephant in the room that Nebraska has to overcome. Right. But yeah, a lot of the other stuff does play in our favor. The bigger challenge now, and this is maybe the one negative, is we've had a good player that was within our 500-mile radius, very talented quarterback, not in the category of the Dylan Raiola, but a very good quarterback who is strongly now leaning to some other schools, Notre Dame, Missouri, a lot of Big Ten schools, Wisconsin, all these other schools have offered him. We've offered him as well, but he's likely to make his decision before Dylan does. So if we stay in it with the Dylan Raiola sweepstakes and then lose and don't get him, we will have now lost a local kid who probably would have been available to us if we had just committed to invest the time and resources on that kid and not Dylan earlier on, and so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. That's one of the tough challenges of recruiting is, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, but sometimes you have to be patient to reel in the big fish.
Right. And the last thing I'll say is just with what you're saying about this kind of coaching jam session, to figure out what we're going to be. That's exciting for me to hear because we've talked about what like our offensive and defensive coordinator, they're coming in with their own philosophies, the defenses and offenses they have run in the past and what they're kind of known for as coaches. I'm sure they're coming in with aspects of that, but it's clear that Matt's whole decision tree here is to try to incorporate, some of that classic Nebraska stuff, with a focus on the run game and being physical at the line of scrimmage and like we mentioned, potential fullback plays and things like that, but then also mixing in, newer stuff. And so what we get may not be what you would expect, just from looking at their resumes.
I totally agree. I think what we're going to see is elements of all of that. I think we're going to see a very diverse offensive and defensive scheme as these coaches figure out what their players are capable of doing, right? But what I do feel confident about, because Matt has obviously emphasized it, and so have a lot of the assistants, is their goal is going to be to take the athletes and the talent that they have on the roster, the guys that are on the team come August, right, that are going to go into the season with them. They're going to figure out a way to take that group of players and make them the best they can be. And what if that means they have to change up the exact defensive philosophy or offensive play calling? Like we're gonna have two players that were both regarded as the top two tight ends in the country for their particular years, out of high school. I mean, we have the potential to have some phenomenal tight ends, right? So we got to find a way to integrate tight ends into our offense more than we have in the past. We just have to, because we have that talent, right? That's looking at your roster and saying, okay, yeah, maybe I want to be more wide receiver focused, but right now I got to throw to tight ends because that's what I got.
Right. Yep, you're right. They have mentioned that in several different interviews. So it'll be interesting to see what comes with the spring game. Like you say, it could be a bit of a mess, with so much dance around their heads. But, we'll put our faith in Matt Rule and hope that when we're coming back to you guys in April, we'll be talking about some good news.
There you go. I'm liking that. I'm very excited. I think it's going to be great. It's already committed that it's going to be on the Big Ten Network, so we're going to be able to watch it. And it's going to be a big, big deal. And I suspect there'll be a darn good crowd like there has been every year. And I'm just really excited. I've tried to avoid drinking the Kool-Aid, but Matt Rule is so much like myself, I feel, that I can't help but drink the Kool-Aid.
He's looking at a mini-me in the TV.
There you go. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we hope you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast. If you did, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on Spotify, leave a comment there if you like the podcast, or you can reach out to us on Apple Podcasts. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.